Happy Tuesday. Today is Tuesday, June the 29th, 2021. Today's daily Bible readings come to us from Psalm 18, verses 1 through 6, and then 43 through 50. 1 Samuel 31, 1 through 13, and then 2 Corinthians 9, 1 through 5. Or you could have read Psalm 88, Leviticus 15, 19 through 31, and then end up again with the text from 2 Corinthians. I'm going to look at 1 Samuel today, 31, 1 through 13, and talk about the death of Saul. We've been following Saul on and off, and his questionable kingship over Israel. And this is his last day. This is the story of how his kingdom comes to an end. And it's not good. Things went really badly for Saul, to put it mildly, and his household during this last battle with the Philistines. He ends up surrounded by them, he and three of his sons, and he actually probably witnesses the death of three of his sons, and one of whom was Jonathan, who was David's best friend. And so he sees this happen. He's up there. He sees the Philistines pressing in on him, and so rather than face death at their hands, he wants to control the situation, and so he literally throws himself on his sword. Probably using literally too much, but he throws himself on his sword. He actually asks his armor bearer to do it, but his armor bearer won't do it because he's like, I'm not going to kill the king. And so Saul just does it himself. If you want something right, you got to do it yourself. And then his armor bearer actually does the same thing because he's like, well, this isn't going to go well for me either. And so that's how he dies. This guy who really always wanted to be in control and wouldn't even listen to God, wouldn't listen to Samuel, kind of wanted to take control of everything up to the last breath. And that's how he dies. Ignominious defeat for such a big name as Saul. The Philistines, they hated Saul. And for all of Saul's shortcomings that we can talk about, and all the ways that he failed, and all the ways that he disappointed God, he had been a thorn in the flesh of the Philistines since the time he was anointed. And when they came across his body, they were excited. They probably were kind of bummed that they didn't get to off him themselves, but they were still pretty happy that he was dead. And they divided the spoils. When they found his body, they did what conquerors did back then. They carried off his body and his armor as a trophy. This is something you see in a lot of heroic literature from the ancient world. Matter of fact, if you've ever read the Trojan War, you see this all the time. Like, two heroes fight, you take his armor as a trophy and you hang it in your place, and you're like, oh yeah, I beat that guy. And so that's what they do. They carried off his body and his armor as a trophy, and it says that they presented them as the good news to the house of their idols. And it's interesting. This is interesting take on the idea of the good news, because when you and I as Christians talk about the good news, we think about the gospel. This is what gospel means. It means good news. And to them, the good news was that their gods were better than Israel's God, and that he had been vanquished because they had defeated his servant Saul. And so the version of their story, of this story actually in 1 Chronicles, is interesting, because it even says that they took Saul's head. By the way, they cut his head off. They took Saul's head and placed it in the temple of their fishy god Dagon as a trophy to show that Dagon was victorious over Yahweh. Which is interesting because if you remember that one time when the Philistines captured the ark, it's a story we get early in 1 Samuel. When the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant, what they did is they carried it back as a trophy and they placed it in the temple of Dagon. They placed it in front of Dagon as a trophy, right? So here you got this imagery of, here's the Ark of the Covenant, and here's their fishy god, I guess Mermaid Man, or he's probably more like Barnacle Boy, up, high, lifted up over Ark of the Covenant. Long story short, they come in, and I think the first day they come in and they find Dagon, like, that idol face down before the Ark of the Covenant, like prostrate. And then, so they like, oh, that's odd. And they set him back up. And then they come in the next day and he's on the ground with his head broken off. So the Philistines may have thought that they were victorious, but God had conquered their old gods long before this. So anyway, that's the DBR for today. Get out, have a good day, enjoy the day, and we'll be back tomorrow with another DBR for you. Boop.